My name is Craig Picken. I'm an executive recruiter. More than a decade ago, I started my practice for one purpose: to use my experience as a former military aviator, business jet sales executive, and P&L leader to help aviation and aerospace companies and their executives be fast, adaptable, and strategic. I do these podcasts to inspire and inform, but more importantly, they are a focused platform to help business leaders grow. Welcome to the Aerospace Executive Podcast. Hey, welcome back to the Aerospace Executive Podcast. I am very happy to have with me Graham Plaster, who's up in Maryland. He is the CEO of theintelligencecommunity.com. He's a former assistant dean of students at the Naval War College, and he's an expert advisor to companies, the military, government, and defense intelligence agencies on emerging technology. So thanks, Graham, for coming on today.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for having me, Craig. I appreciate it.
So a lot going on in the world.
Yeah.
As far as China and emerging threats and stuff we see, stuff we don't see. What are the biggest threats that people feel like are out there now, and where are they coming from?
Well, the biggest threats, I think there's a couple of different things I would talk about. One, of course, is great power competition with China. We're looking at a couple different major technology competitions with China, one being AI, another one being 5G infrastructure, which of course ties into the cloud computing push that we've seen the last couple of years. And that has to do with the integration with everything IoT. And then once you look at IoT, you're looking at sensors for things in the sky too. So you're talking about Starlink with Elon Musk, and you're talking about the capability to extend the internet into rural spaces and across areas right now that are underserved during a coronavirus. All these things have major implications for our performance in national security silos. So there's a lot of interest from the Pentagon and the intelligence community to try to source the best technology quickly and try to shore up certain vulnerabilities in critical infrastructure, as well as in the Defense Department.
So you talked about a couple of things: AI, AI, Internet of Things, Starlink, Elon Musk. Are obviously when people think about aerospace and defense, they think a lot about Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, some of your big defense players. Are the SpaceX's and the Elon Musks of the world and some of these smaller companies that we really don't know about, are they playing a bigger role?
I'm not an aerospace industry professional. I track these things broadly, so I don't want to get out of my depth. The reason why I bring up Elon Musk and Starlink is because, like a lot of people, he's one of the people who has been able to elevate some of these topics to kind of public consumption. And so I think that it's worth kind of starting there for the conversation. There are a lot of other companies that are doing stuff with related technologies. I just had a phone call yesterday with a company that's doing data centers in orbit, and I hosted an event on Monday, which was a joint military pitch day for about 100 companies that are looking to bring new emerging technologies into DoD and the Department of Defense, and also the intelligence community. And some of those are related directly to technologies for space or technologies for aerospace. So we actually had Sir Richard Branson speak at part of the event, and we had the CEO of Zoom, and both obviously Virgin and Zoom both have technologies that are directly relevant, but there are a lot of cottage industries around both of those companies that are certainly up and coming.
So what kind of technologies are we talking about here? What's got you the most excited? What do you think where do you think a lot of the emerging tech is all going?
Well, I think that 5G has me very excited. Right now, I live in a rural environment, and we've had a lot of trouble trying to get our 4 kids and my wife and myself on high-speed internet using a satellite connection. We're using Viasat, which is pretty much the fastest available satellite connection for internet. And then we have 6 hotspots, just upgraded to 7 hotspots in the house, and we're maxing out our high-speed data. And so we're looking forward to 5G in a real way for the last mile of connectivity in that type of environment. And we're looking at other ways to get connectivity. So something like Starlink or other types of low orbit satellite options to bring connectivity around the world in rural environments. It's really interesting to me personally. And I think it is definitely interesting to DoD and the IC for the connectivity it offers and the targeting opportunities, the caching of information on the edge, and the cloud computing capability to do big data crunching, and then the security aspects and vulnerabilities there are all interesting to me. So I think 5G is important. As we talk about 5G, of course, we talk about great power competition with China and Huawei, and how we try to stay up with the best generation of internet connectivity while dealing with political issues. But 5G was where I'd start.
So is Huawei, you hear a lot of noise about Huawei around the world right now. You're obviously an expert in the area. Is it as big a threat as it's made out to be in the news? I mean, talk about the benefits of not doing Huawei and the benefits of say, hey, let's go do something different.
I think there are very good reasons why we should be nervous about having a foreign adversary having a dominant position in our critical infrastructure in the United States. So as we look at intrusion into our critical infrastructure through, purchasing of the infrastructure, or through cybersecurity attacks on the infrastructure, we have to be very cognizant about that. And in some cases, we have to defend ourselves, fight back through cybersecurity methods, or in other cases, we can use political methods to try to push back. But in both cases, we should be concerned about our sovereignty and our and the protection of our assets as a country.
Gotcha. So, look, I think when it comes to China, and you just look at the track they're going down, it's been something that's been kind of the Huawei thing's been ongoing for last 6-7 years as they've been growing, and where they've been getting their technology, i.e. a la Cisco and some of the other places. I kind of had that same opinion that, why even risk it if, backdoors are, if there's a backdoor potential, why not just go? Is there a definitive need to source stuff from China, or is there enough technology around the world to spread the wealth?
Yeah, I mean, I was at a defense event several years ago hosted by one of the leading trade associations, and the keynote speaker was, the founder of Kaspersky, and it's a Russian cybersecurity company. So as good as their product is, of course, it has vulnerabilities because of where it's located, and we can, keep your friends close and your enemies closer is one approach.
Mm-hmm.
And one other approach is, of course, isolationism and a Cold War mentality of creating a lot of walls and protected, intellectual property. So these things are all different approaches. There are vulnerabilities with each approach, and one of the approaches, of course, being the Cold War mentality of total compartmentalization is what was critiqued in the 9/11 Commission report, which is that things were so siloed and so protected and so compartmentalized that we weren't able to share some of the important data that we needed to in order to prevent 9/11. Now, compare that with a very open approach. Now, we use in our NASA exploration have used Russian rockets, right, and have built an international community of scientists that allows us to do things diplomatically through the science community that we can't necessarily do through the State Department or the military sometimes.
Right.
And so by building that connective tissue through the space community, we have perhaps been able to stave off some events that we couldn't have in other ways. So by having a relationship with companies like Kaspersky or maybe Huawei, I would argue that perhaps that is a way to build international stability. But on the other hand, when that company, whether it's Huawei or another company, when that company is completely beholden to the regime that's in power, then we should be nervous about that.
Yeah, I agree with you. But so we talked a little bit about AI, 5G. Going back to the military and defense side of the house, is there's been a big focus on aircraft carriers, aircraft, $1 trillion spent on the F-35. Are we really are we really barking up the right tree when we look at these big programs? Should we be focusing more on, more on drones, more on satellites, more on, just cyber? I mean, is that where the next battles are fought?
Well, one of the critiques on platforms comes out of Christian Brose's recent book. If you've seen The Kill Chain, which came out this year, he talks about how the Pentagon is always purchasing platforms instead of capabilities.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly we can look at the purchase of large platforms, expensive platforms, something that creates its own vulnerability, because if you sink a carrier or you take down in a jet, you've just, taken a big chunk out of our spending, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whereas a swarm of inexpensive drones might be a much more difficult target to bankrupt America with if you were to attack it. So there's kind of a too big to fail kind of problem with aircraft carriers and large infrastructure type expenses, where we can't afford to put them in harm's way, because if we lose it, it's too much of a loss. On the other hand, I think that the U.S. Military's dominance is largely it's largely a result of the aircraft carrier platform and the ability to project power around the world, and also our submarines.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a little bit Navy centric in how I think about these things, but the platforms have done a lot for us in reinforcing our position as the world superpower for a long time. So as we move forward, if we do shift our mindset away from platforms towards capabilities, I think there will be an enduring need to think of capabilities in terms of systems, if not platforms. And certainly when we're talking about systems, like operating systems, like Christian Brose, who wrote Kill Chain and criticized platforms, also is working for Anduril as the chief strategy officer. And they recently pitched that Anduril would become the operating system for warfare, the OS for war. And so that has some similarities to becoming a platform, if you will, again, of the future, just like the aircraft carrier was a platform. So to differentiate between platforms and systems, I would say that maybe a system would be a lot more agile to be upgraded from year to year, whereas platforms have persisted over 40 plus years in the same form. So the ability to kind of reinvent yourself, or like we've said in the military, to rebuild your jet while you're flying it is very difficult. So to be able to create a system that can be continually upgraded while you're using it is important as technology change accelerates.
Is the DoD concentrating? I mean, the issue you have, you're an ex-Navy officer. You see these program leaders, they come, they go, new guy comes in, different chain of thought. I mean, it seems like it's always shifting. Is there a long-term strategy in the aerospace and defense world to create the systems, or is it more like, hey, look, this is good for 2 years, then we'll figure it out in 2 years, just kind of kicking the can down the road, always putting Band-Aids on stuff?
Well, I think there are strategies. I won't, speak to how well those strategies are being followed or implemented, but certainly the 2018 National Defense Strategy that came out of this current administration, and then also recently there was a emerging tech strategy that was just published, I think, a couple weeks ago. They're very, very broad documents, but they do point us in the direction of needing to invest more dollars, more time into getting access to emerging tech. One of my friends, Pete Newell, who helps run Hacking for Defense through his company, BMNT, he says, we can't just speed up acquisition of stuff. If we buy more stuff faster, it doesn't guarantee that we are buying the right stuff for government. And so we've oftentimes criticized the acquisition process as the primary problem in getting emerging tech into government and DoD.
Right.
But we have to solve both at the same time. We have to make acquisition better while also figuring out how to get access to the right stuff.
How do you do that? I mean, you've got a very big, cumbersome acquisition process. You've got congressional budgeting requirements. You've got a whole lot of, hurdles that you have to, jump over, but tech changes so quickly. How do the intelligence communities, how does the DoD, how does Raytheon and the big defense guys even keep up with the needs?
Well, there have been a lot of initiatives. For instance, in the last couple of years, there was something called a Section 809 panel, which was established to try to figure out ways to improve acquisition. And there was some pushback from constituencies within the SBA, especially among the set-aside communities, the small business communities, because for a long time there have been ways that the government can purchase things quickly, whether it's through sole source methods, OTAs, 8A, things like that, and yet there are cultural chasms between those different acquisition models. And so when you try to use one instead of the other, then there are some political forces there. But to answer your question more directly, how can the government do it? I think they are currently doing it, but I think that they need to potentially provide a lot more education and also align incentives correctly internally, so that there's a little bit of fire in the belly to do it across government. Because right now, if you're working in government and you're buying technology, the whole process is slow, and you're not going to lose your job if it moves a little bit slower. In the private sector, if you don't sell your stuff quickly or solve the client's problem quickly, you might lose your job and your company might go away. So the government has an incentive to protect tax dollars, spend it slowly, spend it safely. It's very risk averse as a result, wants to go with big, prime contractors that have done a lot of good past performance. They're not incentivized to take bets on small companies with emerging technologies that might fail. Whereas in the private sector, an investor, wants to get through 9 failures to get through to the unicorn success on the 10th try. So there's a very different ecosystem on both sides.
So does the mentality need to change then? Does the mentality need to change? Hey, look, let's well, politically, it's probably very hard, to, like you said, to blow through 9 companies or nine systems to, before you find the right one. Nobody looks at the success; they look at the 9 failures along the way. So I guess,
yeah, I think the culture is changing. If you look at Dr. Will Roper's kind of push to do a lot of that, to create more of an acceptance of risk, because they understand that if you're not taking risk, you're not going to get the higher rewards. And for a long time, DARPA has had the high risk, high reward branding around what they do. If you look at what's happening with the AFWorks SBIR grant efforts, they're taking a lot of small bets of $50,000 each to try to get new companies in the door. And then hopefully some of them will make it to phase 2 and on to phase 3 program record type opportunities. But even that, you have a huge, what's called valley of death, where companies will get a little bit of money from government, get kind of the wheel turning, and then they can't quite get over to a long-term contract.
Right.
Because it's like a 18-month to 24-month sales cycle to really get into something serious. And if you don't have enough people working for your company full time, it's going to be too big of an effort to really fund. So I think one of the things we need is we need an investor community that has the stomach for it, that actually will help these companies develop a large enough staff to make it over that valley.
Gotcha. So if going back to the private sector now, a lot of change going on, AI, 5G, Internet of Things, defense and intelligence community, companies that are supporting them, obviously their targets. You read a lot like, hey, forget Boeing and Raytheon and Northrop Grumman. Let's go start to hack their suppliers. How do we start to protect the supply chain from cyber? How do we start to protect it from other methods of intelligence gathering that the world is using to collect US information?
Well, I mean, supply chain analysis is a major theme among all of the consulting firms around national security. If you go and knock on any door at Deloitte or KPMG or Booz Allen, you're going to find somebody who that's their specialty, is figuring out vulnerabilities in supply chains. So I would say that there's probably a million reports out there already on how to fix that system. I'm not going to pretend like I'm that analyst.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that my very simple response, especially post-COVID, is going to be develop more systems that are in the United States and located inside of allied countries. I'll go ahead and argue against that point and harken back to an earlier point I made, that if we do have systems that we rely on inside of other countries that are not as friendly, sometimes it can create a vehicle for peace building. If we're relying on companies in China and they're relying on companies in the United States, then it does give us a financial incentive to work through issues with each other. Because I like to say it creates kind of like the picture of two boxers that get tangled up. They're not fighting because they're rapping with each other. And so if you have that, those interests on both sides, then it can provide kind of a tertiary opportunity to work through things. On the other hand, the supply chain issue, I think post-COVID is, how can we make sure we're sourcing as much as possible from the United States? A, to keep money inside our economy, and B, to create more stable supply chains in case things get, rocky. We can make sure that we have those supply chains pumping, and maybe C, to limit any vulnerability that we have for manipulation of the supply chains. So if we have foreign adversaries looking at ways that they can tamper with those supply chains by inserting things into them that we don't want in our country, or putting a chokehold on one of the supply chains, then it's best to get away from that.
If you're the CEO of one of these companies, what's the one thing that scares the hell out of you? Is it AI? Is it just a new type of cyber threat? How do they protect it? How do they protect against it?
I think right now a lot of companies still aren't wrapping their head around cybersecurity threats, and we've done a lot of number crunching on how big those threats could be in dollars. I think it's trillions of dollars in risk that exists around the world in cybersecurity vulnerabilities. But I think unless your company has just recently been hacked or penetrated somehow, then you're going to keep on doing business as usual. So, like all things in the military, but in government, laws and standards are written in blood. So until something bad happens, things don't change. And as a result, I would say if I was running one of these companies, one of the general pieces of advice is, if it's a technology company, then security should be baked in from day one. When you're building your product, say it's a software platform or even software hardware, blended platform. And I know I'm using the word platform, but let's say not a platform, but a product. Considering security from day one is important, because a lot of tech startups and technology companies want to run fast and break things, which is one of the slogans that Facebook used to use. They want to get up and going. They want to get funded. They want to sell their company before they really run into any real friction. And then, but in the future, maybe that won't be possible anymore. We're talking about a future where you can automate a lot of attacks at a quantum speed. So in that kind of a future, we might need to bake in quantum strength encryption and quantum strength, protection from the beginning, from day one of the creation of a new tech company.
Are people starting to think about all that now? I mean, you hear a lot about quantum computing.
Yeah, I'm advising on a company right now called Quirks, and we actually have a technology that is quantum proof encryption. Also, I know about the founder of the Entanglement Institute up in Rhode Island, and then I know there's also a quantum computing lab down with the University of Maryland. So there are definitely people thinking about it. We're still years away from, stable, usable quantum computing, but I think we do need to be thinking about it now, because the amount of speed that is implied with that would change the game quite a bit.
I hope you enjoyed the latest edition of the Aerospace Executive Podcast. You can reach out to me directly, Craig at northstaresg.com, or check us out at www.northstaresg.com. You can subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, Podbean, or on YouTube. Just do a search for Aerospace Executive Podcast. Thanks again. I'm Craig Pickett.